I came home early from a business trip, only to find my wife's side of the closet empty and a cold message that shattered everything. I'm moving in with someone more successful. I didn't respond, just called my lawyer. 48 hours later, she realized she'd left with nothing, and my phone exploded with desperate calls. What happened next changed everything. I am Jeremy, 33 years old, a project manager working in the fast-paced world of technology. For the most part, had been a series of smooth roads, no real bumps, no sharp turns. It was as if I had found my rhythm, everything in its place. My wife, Jasmine, 28, was everything I could have wanted in a partner, brilliant, ambitious, and passionate about life. She worked as a marketing specialist, someone who was driven by her desire for luxury and success. Our relationship, our marriage, felt like a partnership of equals, until the day it wasn't. We had been married for 5 years, and for the most part, I thought we were doing well. There were no glaring problems, no dramatic arguments, just the quiet ebb and flow of life. Yet, over time, I began to notice subtle shifts in Jasmine, small things that began to add up. The coldness in her smile when she greeted me after work, the occasional distant look in her eyes during dinner, the way she started spending more time away from home. I dismissed it at first, work stress, maybe, or just the monotony of life. But deep inside, I knew something was changing. I didn't have the luxury of much time at home. My job demanded long hours, travel, and focus. But the thought of Jasmine, my constant companion, kept me going. So, I decided to surprise her. I came home early from a business trip, thinking that I could rekindle that spark we had when we first fell in love. I was excited to see her, to be home, to remind her of what we meant to each other. But when I walked through the front door, everything felt wrong. The house was unusually quiet. I called out her name, but the silence that followed felt heavy, almost oppressive. I walked into our bedroom, only to find her side of the bed empty. Her closet, once filled with her favorite clothes, was now barren. Jewelry was missing, as were her beauty products, the little things that made her. And then, I saw it, a text message that would change everything. I can't do this anymore. I'm moving in with someone more successful than you. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about us, about her, came crashing down. When I stepped through the door, expecting the warmth of my wife's embrace, the kind we shared every time I came home, I was met with an eerie silence. The house that I had always considered my sanctuary now felt hollow. The silence was deafening, heavy with an unsettling sense of abandonment. Everything felt wrong. I had always known this place to be my refuge, a place of comfort and familiarity, but now it was nothing more than a shell of what it once was. It was like she had vanished, as if the very air had erased any trace of her existence. Her things, the ones that had been so familiar, so present in every corner of our home, were gone. No clothes hanging in the closet, no makeup on the bathroom counter, no books strewn on the nightstand. It felt like someone had come in, scooped up every piece of her life, and walked out. Everything that had defined us as a couple was just gone. The absence of her presence was more suffocating than the silence itself. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me as I took in the emptiness. My mind was racing, but it couldn't catch up with my body. I reached for my phone, hands shaking, and dialed her number. It rang once, twice, then straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I couldn't. I stared at the phone in disbelief, my heart pounding in my chest, knowing that something was terribly wrong. Then came the message. I can't do this anymore. I'm moving in with someone more successful than you. The words didn't make sense. I read them over and over again, as if I could force them to have some sort of logical meaning, as if I could understand how they fit into the life we had built. But they didn't fit. The life we had built, our home, our shared dreams, the plans we had for the future, was now reduced to this. A text. A cold, harsh message. It hit me like a slap face. The numbness began to creep in, slowly at first, and then all at once. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. Not to us. Not after everything. But it was happening. The woman I had loved, the woman I had spent years with, had left. Without a word, without any explanation, and with only the cruelest of messages to show for it. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of the chaos swirling inside me. But I couldn't. Not yet. I knew I had to stay calm. I couldn't let the rage, the betrayal, overwhelm me. I had to act. I picked up the phone again, this time calling Nathan, my lawyer and close friend. I had no time for emotions right now. I had to protect myself, to make sure I was prepared for whatever came next. I couldn't allow myself to fall apart. Not now. Not when the future was uncertain, and everything we had was on the line. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Nathan. "Hey, Nathan, it's Jeremy. My wife left home. She vanished. She cheated on me," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "I need to start the divorce proceedings." As we began to discuss the situation, he asked me what had happened between us, but I didn't want to go into detail. He knows me well, and he told me he would call me back shortly after 1 p.m. While I waited for Nathan to call back, I began documenting everything. I took out my phone and began snapping photos of the empty closet, the untouched bed, the cold, empty space where my wife's things had once been. I filmed the scene, the silence that had taken over, capturing every corner of the house as if I were preserving evidence for a trial. Every corner, every empty space was a reminder of what I had lost, but also of what I needed to protect. I knew that this moment, this feeling of shock and disbelief, couldn't last. I couldn't afford to let it. And I couldn't afford to be weighed down. There were things that needed to be done, steps that had to be taken. Jasmine's actions had already set the course for this, and now it was time for me to act. I wasn't going to allow myself to be left in the dark. Unsure of what was happening, unsure of what was going to happen next. I couldn't afford to be paralyzed by emotions. I had to think clearly, logically. And so, I made my list, changed the locks, canceled joint accounts, make sure I had control of everything she and I had built together. I didn't reach out to her family. I didn't answer her texts or calls. I didn't need to. The last thing I needed was more confusion, more distractions. My priority was clear. I needed to protect what was mine. My assets, my life, my future. That's what mattered now. The emotions would come later. The anger, the sadness, the sense of betrayal, it would all come in time. But right now, I needed to focus. I needed to be rational. I couldn't afford to let the storm inside me take over. Not when there were bigger, more important things at stake. As I stood there in the silence of our now empty home, something shifted inside me. This was it. The moment when I stopped being the man I thought I was, the man who had let his love define him, and became someone else. Someone who could survive this. Someone who could rebuild. And so, I took the first step. I let go of the disbelief, took a deep breath, and started to take control. Reddit members, can I ask you, what would you do in my situation? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Here's update 1 on Reddit. 3 days had passed since my wife left, and I was beginning to see the stark contrast between the life I had known and the life she had chosen. While I worked through the quiet chaos of my own emotions, she was living out a new reality with Martin. The life she had believed would be filled with luxury and success now seemed to be unraveling, layer by layer. A man she thought would offer her the lavish lifestyle she had always dreamed of. She had envisioned him as the answer to everything, the successful man who could provide her with all the things I couldn't, wealth, status, and the illusion of perfection. The life she thought she was stepping into had been painted in gold, adorned with promises of a future that shimmered with opulence. And for a brief moment, she believed in that fantasy, convinced that this was her chance at happiness, a life she'd always wanted, but just a few days in, the facade began to crack. The gleaming surface she had imagined soon faded, and the harsh reality began to seep in. Martin wasn't the man he had pretended to be. Instead of the business mogul or successful entrepreneur she had believed him to be, he was just another man who had learned how to live off the wealth of others. My wife began to see the truth that had been hidden behind the glossy exterior. He was nothing more than a kept man, relying on his relationships with older, wealthier women to fund his lifestyle. As the days passed, my wife started to understand that the man she had chosen was not who she thought. Martin's financial instability was just the beginning of her rude awakening. He had no steady income, no career to fall back on. The penthouse apartment he had once shown off to her, the one that looked so perfect in photos, was just another rental, an illusion, a show for the outside world. His car, the one that had made him appear successful, wasn't even his own. It was leased, barely holding together financially, much like the rest of his life. But what struck her the hardest was how much she had been taken in. She thought she had traded one life for a better one, a life of success and grandeur, but what she had stepped into was a world built on lies. The lavish dinners, the glamorous vacations, the designer clothes, all of it had been a lie. None of it was real. It had been a carefully constructed illusion meant to make her believe that this man could give her everything she wanted, when in fact, he had nothing to offer but more empty promises. She had been sold a dream that wasn't hers. And now, as she sat in that penthouse, surrounded by the very things that had once excited her, she realized the extent of the deception. It wasn't just Martin who had been lying, it was her own belief in the illusion of wealth and success that had led her down this path. The reality hit her like a storm, hard and sudden. What she thought was the life of luxury was actually a house of cards, teetering on the brink of collapse. Then came the realization that everything she had done for Martin, everything she had bought him, the gifts, the designer watches, the expensive gadgets, had all been used against her. Those items were no longer symbols of affection but collateral in his endless cycle of debt. He had pawned them off, sold the very gifts she had given him, just to cover his own failing finances. The realization hit her like a slap to the face. She had been living in a dream that had been nothing more than a cruel joke. My wife's heart began to weigh heavy with regret. She had left behind everything that was stable and real, everything that had offered her love and security, for a fleeting illusion. The more she thought about it, the more she saw how badly she had been deceived. She had believed in Martin's promise of a perfect life, but now that life was slipping through her fingers. She had fallen for an illusion, and now she was left with nothing but the bitter taste of disappointment. But there was more. The sense of betrayal deepened as she realized how she had been used, not just by Martin, but by her own desire to live a life of luxury at any cost. She had been manipulated by her own fantasies, led to believe that this was the life she deserved, when in fact, it was a hollow existence built on lies. Every day, every moment that she spent with him now seemed like a joke, a cruel joke at her expense. As the days wore on, my wife's regret became almost unbearable. She had traded a love that was real, a life that was grounded in truth, for an illusion that had shattered before her eyes. The man she had believed would give her everything had only taken from her. And now, she was left with nothing but the pieces of a broken dream. She saw the truth now, clearer than ever. The life she had envisioned with Martin was never real. It was just a mask, a performance he had put on to deceive her into thinking he was someone he wasn't. And now, as she sat in that empty space, filled only with memories of what could have been, she had nothing left but the crushing weight of regret. Reddit members, what do you think about my decision? Comment below so I know you're following my story. And my channel is on the way to reach out 1,000 subscribers. Your supports are all meaningful to me. Appreciate and thanks so much. No matter how much she begged. Her messages came more frequently in the following days. Every text, every phone call, seemed to carry the same apology, the same plea for another chance. But did she really think I would care for her like before? Each message felt like another weight on my chest, another reminder of the pain she had caused. But I had already made my decision. I had already started rebuilding my life without her, and I wasn't about to let her broken promises derail the progress I had made. Finally, I had had enough. I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I needed to be clear, and I needed to take control of my own future. So I sent her one final message, the one that would end all of this once and for all. This ends now. If you truly cared, you wouldn't have walked away in the first place. My lawyer is taking care of everything, and the divorce papers will be served shortly. This will all be handled through legal channels from here on out. You had your chance, but now, live your life. I'm done. And that was it. There was no room left for negotiation, no more chances to give. The damage had been done, and I had reached my breaking point. A small, yet undeniable sense of satisfaction washed over me in the finality of it all. The decision was mine, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace with it. After the divorce, I began to find peace in my life again. The difficult months slowly passed, and it felt like a heavy burden had been lifted off my shoulders. The past relationship left deep scars, but I knew I had to learn to live a new life, a life of freedom, no longer bound by the problems of the past. The lesson I learned from all of this is simple but profound. Life doesn't always go according to plan, and sometimes, to move forward, you have to let go. It's not a failure, it's a new step forward. I've learned that you should never lose yourself for anyone, and you deserve to live a happy, free life. No matter what, remember that happiness starts with yourself, not from anyone else.